The rule of law is better than the rule of any individual. Aristotle. Picture this: a society wherein everyone's interpretation of morality and legality is relative, wherein everyone has their own various interpretations of morality. What is morality, you may ask? Morality is basically the recognition of what is good and what is bad. Now, in a society that is actually in that manner, what do you think would happen? Of course, there would be a lack of order. That is the obvious answer, because everyone has their own various interpretations of what is good and what is bad. You might find that a murderer or a criminal has a particular way of interpreting stealing or murdering. They say that they had a motive, right? Take, for example, one robs a house without having any law enforcement to catch him or to arrest him because he says that I actually needed what my neighbor had. Now, that's why this quote is so important in stating the benefit of law, the significance of law in any particular society. The rule of law. What is law? Now, law is basically some sort of principle or rule that governs a particular nation. It straightens how a particular state is supposed to go in terms of morality. Now, you do understand that legality and morality have a particular connection. Morality is basically the framework of legality. If there was no morality, then there would be no legality. But that is out of context. Now, what is the point here? The point is, law is significant in maintaining the order of a particular society. It makes sure that everyone in a particular society is equal before the law. That is basically what the rule of law is. And it makes sure that everyone's interpretation of law is fixed on one particular code. That is what we know as a legal code. If we had a rule of an individual, it would not actually state the general belief of what law is. It would not actually dictate the general belief of what good and bad are. That's why law is so important. It maintains the order of a society. Again, I want you to get that picture into your mind. A society wherein we have people with their various interpretations of legality, and a society wherein there's one interpretation of legality. That is how various societies in the entire globe are today, and that's how they were even in the past. I want you to look at ancient Babylon. They had this thing known as the Hammurabi Code, or which you famously know as an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. That is actually one of the laws within the Hammurabi Code. It had such a centered focus on what legality actually is, and that is why having a general interpretation of legality, the rule of law, is better than the rule of an individual, where everyone interprets what is good and what is bad according to their own conceits. Now, in Kenya, of course, we have Kenyan law, right? And you have to understand that the way we interpret law as a whole is basically according to international law. That's what forms the law of most of the countries, most of the sovereign countries today. It's international law. That means the entire globe has one fixation on what law actually is, what legality is, and how it should be followed. That makes every society within the entire globe orderly, right? Now, if we as Kenya are following this international law, you have to understand that everyone in the entire globe, every nation has a particular definition, one specific definition of what morality actually is. Now, they will say international law, it does not bind every state organ. Take, for example, I'm sure international law particularly has a law in killing. Take, for example, murdering. Of course, murdering is wrong morally, but if you look, there's a particular sovereignty that every state has, independent of international law. Take, for example, in the United States, yes, murder according to international law is illegal. It is immoral. That is something that we as humans have come to understand. But we still have murdering legally, right? We have wherein someone receives a death penalty or a death sentence. Or we have euthanasia. Now, euthanasia is basically the medical practice of killing someone intentionally to ease them of their pain. But more on that in another video. Now, Basically, what is the point? The point is the rule of law is better than the rule of any individual. If we had if society was governed by the rules of particular individuals, then we would have a society that is not as orderly as you see it now. That is the main significance of law to every society within the globe.